What I'm going to do in this video is actually get into what you might actually study and think about when you do a PhD in strategy and innovation, why you might actually think it's kind of really interesting, and then get into, maybe some possible careers that you could do with a PhD in strategy and innovation. And then finally, go into where you might actually find world-class institutions where you can study, strategy and innovation to some sort of degree. So why might you actually study strategy and innovation? So what exactly do we do? And this doesn't cover sort of the broad, like everything, right? People study, one thing you'll learn when you do a PhD is you'll learn that people study everything and anything, like just the weirdest stuff out there. I mean, it's interesting, but if you're not used to it, you're going to think like, why are they studying that? Well, it turns out it's really important to study that thing. So, but in general, people study strategy and innovation to sort of figure out how companies can produce technologies and products, and how this production of technologies and products can produce value, both for the consumer, both for society and for the firm, and then how the firm can appropriate some of that value and distribute it amongst the different people that are sort of represented, what are called the stakeholders of the firms, who the firm actually represents to some sort of degree. And another component that we study, so that's the sort of, pushing the product out from the firm's perspective. But we also study how technologies and innovations actually impact how companies change over time, right? So we study the technological trajectory, and we sort of try to figure out what is going on with the technological trajectory. Whew, it's a hard word to say. So we're looking to see how it sort of changes over time, what impacts does it have on society, on companies, and things like that. So in general, that's what we're sort of focused on very broadly, right? But again, people study all sorts of crazy things. And putting your finger on what exactly innovation is, that's a little bit tricky. And what strategy is a little bit tricky, and everybody has all these crazy debates all the time about it. So why might you actually find a PhD in strategy and in innovation really interesting? So if you are interested at technology in general, if you're interested in innovation, if you're interested in how companies actually work, if you're interested in sort of thinking about companies as a whole and organizations as a whole, and a lot of sort of big, broad concepts, and you have a curious mind, and you sort of think about, technologies at 1,000-foot level or 10,000-foot level, then this is a particularly interesting research area to study. So this was my big thing, and what I quickly discovered is that when you study in the natural sciences, so again, I was telling you I was thinking about going into, actually it was polymer science at the time, in engineering, and doing a PhD in polymer science and statistics, versus doing this, I would have been really focused on that one particular kind of technology, which was really narrowly defined, really interesting stuff, had a tremendous amount of promise. But that's going to be really focused on just one kind of technology. But when you do a doctorate in innovation and strategy in general, you're looking at all sorts of technologies and how they sort of change over time. And you don't sort of dig in real deep about one specific kind. You might, but it's unlikely. You're going to cover things pretty broadly, and you're going to get sort of a smattering of how these things sort of fit together. And it's incredibly interesting. It is like, if you can imagine, the difference between studying the natural sciences is like actually reading a really intense mathematical textbook and knowing that off by heart. And then, that there's popular press, which is like maybe reading the Financial Times or Harvard Business Review and just kind of having like, oh, okay, that's interesting. We're kind of in the middle when you do this, right? You're not going to get really deep in one particular thing in the sense of one particular technology, but you're going to sort of be able to cross those boundaries of being able to talk to managers and actually communicate what you're trying to do, but then also generalize across different technologies and companies and things like that. So it's incredibly interesting. The other thing that you sort of have to realize, and especially if you're coming from the harder sciences, right, mathematics and things like that, and you're interested in going into a business school, you are going to be thinking like a social scientist. Now, that doesn't mean thinking like a social scientist that you have to abandon all the mathematics and things like that you learn in sort of physical science stuff that you learn. In fact, there's really promising research that happens when you combine those things, right? And it's really pretty interesting stuff. But at the same time, you're thinking about how sort of people and organizations interact over time. And that's kind of, this is broadly what I'm trying to get at. So what careers actually are you going to get if you study a PhD in strategy and innovation? Generally, if you do a PhD of any sort, we are training you as faculty and professors and all that kind of stuff. We're training you to actually work in a university or something that's equivalent, and doing your own sort of research and digging deep into your own kind of research topic. So it's not necessarily a university, but it could be some sort of institution. Maybe you work for the, you do research for the FDA or something like that. I don't know. But then the general goal is that you're publishing and reading and writing. And moving forward that way, rather than you're actually going to be a practitioner and being a manager. If you want to be a practitioner and a manager, what you should probably do, and a good career path for that is going in and getting an MBA. And then you're going to be a practitioner on the ground, boots on the ground kind of stuff. You can also do an executive MBA, which is sort of advanced kind of thing. Much more advanced if you're more advanced in your career, or you could do a doctorate of a business administration, and lots of programs have that kind of stuff. Lots of institutions have that, which is a much more in-depth kind of program. It's closer to a PhD. In fact, I think Harvard's they don't have a PhD. They have a doctorate of business administration. And so this brings me to the next part, is where can you actually find institutions that where you can study a PhD in strategy and innovation. Again, my institution, don't worry about that, right? Like you can, if you're interested, you can look at the institution, but you can, what I want you to think about is very broadly, because this is your choice, this is your life. So don't sort of listen to anything that I say. So this advice is going to be as broad as possible. What you should do is actually ask the faculty of where you did your undergraduate degree or your master's degree. So a lot of you will have to have an MBA to get into a PhD in strategy and innovation. I didn't have one. I had a master's of applied science, but it was in management science. So you can do that. You just have to find out, you just ask the faculty of, where are really good institutions, who are people that you know of that are doing really interesting things, and get their advice from that. That is going to give you some really good advice. The other thing that you should be also thinking about is looking at rankings of the College of Business's rankings. And I'm going to put a really big caveat on that, though, extremely big caveat on that, because these rankings, they can be they're flexible to a lot of degrees, right? That schools, institutions jump up, they jump down on these rankings pretty quickly on any given time. The other thing that ends up happening is that there are amazing people in institutions around the world that wouldn't be in that sort of ranking system. And there's reasons for that, because maybe their program is not called a college of business that they're in, but they're in some sort of other institution, or that they are working kind of independently, or they're part of a university that is not ranked, but they are a superstar. You have to find those particular people. Those are really interesting people. They can help you out. And really, it's an apprentice model, what we do. And so you work with the faculty pretty closely, right? So you're not working with the university per se, you're working with the faculty. So the faculty they're gonna really help you out, and that's probably going to be the thing that you should prioritize the most, is who is going to be your thesis advisor, and think about that. The other thing that you should also think about is, you have to think strategically in what you are doing and what you're choosing. So that means, ranking based on your life and who you are. Also thinking about, when you make this choice, is thinking about where can you find institutions that best fit what you are about and where you want to go. Which sometimes doesn't necessarily mean like the highest ranking institutions around the world, right? So sometimes it's actually a lower ranking institution, but you get a foot in the door with some group of individuals that are doing really interesting research, right? So that's all I'm going to suggest with that. So that's what I would do in terms of where to actually find, and this is what, I probably relied a little bit more on the rankings rather than talking to people, but the talking to people, finding people that are research active and asking them where to go, that's going to be a really important thing in terms of helping you out with finding a great institution that fits what you are doing, right? So finding research active is important. And how you can find people that are research active, look to see if they're publishing in our top journals. I'm not going to list them. You can find them out in terms, there's lots of websites that'll tell you the top journals, and they're producing pretty under a consistent basis. And you look to see at, what they're doing, and ask them where they would go if they were to do a PhD again. And they will often give you a really good answer in one way or the other. People are usually really upfront, and they're really amazing when they give this advice. So again, I talked about in this video why you should do a PhD in strategy and innovation, where you might actually find them. And again, they might not be necessarily called a PhD in strategy and innovation. Oh, that's the other thing I wanted to point out. PhD in strategy and innovation, there's very few programs that are actually called that. What you're looking for are programs that are called like business administration. They are sometimes called strategy. Sometimes they are called general management. Sometimes they are called technology. But you're looking at programs like that.